Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to talk about SEC basketball action over the weekend. Full disclosure, I was watching more baseball and hoops this weekend, but did follow it a decent amount anyway. But let's start in Gainesville, where Florida pulled a shocker I don't think either of us saw coming, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we picked Auburn and we said, we were talking about how difficult it was to do our confidence rankings on that weekend, and it's like, I guess by default you kind of have to pick the team that's number 2 in the country and playing a team that's not ranked. But look, we mentioned it. I mean, I don't think it's a shocker now for Auburn to lose on the road, and I think because again we talked about, quite frankly, it felt like they should have lost at Missouri and at Georgia. And so I think going into this, yes, it was really hard to trust Florida. It's been hard to trust Florida all season long. But I think once you actually got into the game and you're realizing that this may just be what Auburn is on the road, I think that is what we have to understand now. I think it's just too much of a trend to where they're going to get everybody's best shot for starters, and they just have not played well away from home, really all year, right? I guess you go back to, they beat South Carolina on the road by 15. I know they beat St. Louis back in December, but since then, it's kind of been hit or miss in terms of what you're going to get for them. And more specifically, even though they won those games at Alabama and I think it was Ole Miss, they haven't played great against Missouri, didn't play great against, Georgia, and lost at Arkansas, and now they lose at Florida. I just think it's one of those things where if Florida played well, which they did, you could see Auburn losing this game, and that's kind of what happened here. I think for Florida, it was about the two guys that I think we mentioned going into it. If Florida was going to win this game, it was really about two guys, and that was Colin Castleton and Tyree Appleby, and they stepped up and made the plays, and that's what you want out of your top 2 players. You want those guys in these big games. Your season's on the line. As we said, this was a huge game for Florida. They had to win this, I think, to significantly boost their resume that's just been lackluster to this point. And they did. And I think Castleton, you could tell from the start, he was ready for a game like this. Like it or not, he outplayed Walker Kessler.
Kessler didn't have a single block in that game. That might be a first.
Well, I was going to say, it is what it is. If you watch that game, Castleton was the better player. And we haven't said, a lot this season when we talk about Kessler, as we mentioned. He has been kind of the 1B to Oscar Tshiebwe's 1A for us in terms of guys that have just impacted the game, but 0 blocks, 3 rebounds, just not one of those games that, I think if you're Auburn, you're not going to win when he's playing like that. And again, he hasn't had many of those. So it's not like we should be concerned, I think, about Walker Kessler. It's just Castleton brought it, and I think you got to give him credit for that. And again, on the flip side, Tyree Appleby was terrific, and Auburn's guards were not terrific at times. And I think that is, something too that we've talked about. I think, Green didn't have his best game for sure. He doesn't make a field goal, goes 0 of 5 from 3, or excuse me, he had 5 points. We didn't make a 3-point field goal, goes 0 of 5. Katie Johnson goes 0 of 3 from 3, and that's what we talked about with this Auburn team, and it keeps being brought up. Yeah, they go 5 of 14, but there are just some of those games like this where, if this is one of those past teams that could hit 8 threes, right, versus 5, this team just has been up and down shooting the ball, and I think that's something that we may look at, especially away from home, because it is, it's a different environment, different atmosphere. I just think that's something we're probably going to keep coming back to. But still, I think this was about Florida and understanding that your season is on the line here. You have to win this game. And maybe it was only 2 guys that really did it, but they did it, right? And that's all that matters. So, yeah, I think you give Florida a lot of credit here. It's a game that they almost lost at the end. Everybody's kind of talking about it. You watch the replay on that final possession, and, literally if that pass goes
but
about.
Neither team wanted to win that game.
Well, I hope Florida wanted to win that. They tried to make it.
There was an interesting back and forth the last few seconds. Yeah,
they were up 8 with 2 minutes left, I think it was, and you're thinking, I thought it was, I'm like, all right, that's it. Like you just, that's over. But then literally Auburn gets a final possession to win it. And again, if it goes that angle is a little bit different on that, as everyone said, you got a dunk and game over, Auburn wins, but it just wasn't. And yeah, so Florida gets a big win, and I still don't think they're in the tournament at this point, but they're at least right there on the edge now. So
Yeah, metrics on Florida this morning: 49 in net, 50 in Ken Palm, which I've started to notice a pretty decent overlap between net and Ken Palm. You've got Florida is 2-6 on the road, 2-7 in quad one, 3 losses outside of quad one. But, I know we've kind of dogged Florida for a while. I feel like they've been a little underrated the last few weeks. Castleton being back has obviously helped. But I feel like between Appleby, who was really good, he was hurt a week ago, and I think that health was a little bit of a question. You mentioned he really carried them. He gets 26 points, hits 5 threes and 7 of 8 from the line, and Myron Jones has really been good at times. I mean, this is a team Anthony DeRuggi has played well at times. I'm starting to like this team a little bit more the more I go back and think about Florida's personnel. Maybe I'm overdoing it here, and I know that the resume hasn't been much outside of beating Ohio State and Auburn, but I don't know. It's not a terrible team either.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. And it's because exactly of something that you said that I think is the important point here. At times.
Okay.
Like, at times, Florida looks really good. But at other times, they're just not. I mean, again, I haven't really. Maybe we have differing opinions here. And guess what?
Well, we did last year, too.
We allow that, right? Like,
right.
We allow that here on our videos. We don't all have to have the same opinion. I'm kind of on the flip side. I have not been impressed with Florida recently, especially. And I think it's because, as we said, you look at that game at Missouri, right? They win that day game by a point in a game really that Missouri had no business losing at the end, but they did. Florida has to struggle to beat Ole Miss at home by 5 in overtime. They beat Georgia at home, but by no means was I just overly impressed with Florida in that game. They get blown out of Kentucky, which anyone gets blown out of Kentucky, as we know. Then they lose this game at A&M that they had no business losing.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that hold me back on Florida, is I just keep thinking, I think about the game against A&M, where, again, they have no business losing that game, especially with a lead, whatever it was, 4 with a minute and a half, whatever it was, to go. And then, of course, you keep thinking back, and like it or not, I know this was December, but it's still burning your brain that a team like this is going to lose by 15 at home to Texas Southern. And I know, as we said, It's one of those just weird results, but it's still – and by the way, too, they got blown out at Ole Miss a month ago. So those are the things just keep holding me back on this team. And yet I still think beating Auburn, like now I'm back to that middle where I'm like, okay, where I was kind of really down on Florida. Now I'm like, okay, I'm back in the middle on them. And I can see their path to get to where they need to be. I think this game on Tuesday against Arkansas, right? Like this
huge.
The Auburn one was huge, but this is even like now they just get more and more important from here. And the one thing we kept talking about with Florida going into this weekend was what? Their 3 best opportunities all in Gainesville the rest of the way. And now they're 1-0 in those 3. If they can go to 2-0 with Arkansas, you get Kentucky at the end of the season. Yeah, I mean they have an opportunity here. And that's why I think if you're a Florida fan, you're just looking and you're like, can we please just take advantage of this opportunity? Because otherwise, you're looking back at the A&M game, at the Ole Miss game, at the Texas Southern game. Those are the games that are going to keep you out of the tournament unless you take advantage of these opportunities. And I just want to say this too. Because of this Florida team and how they've just been a little up and down, I could see them beating Arkansas at home. I could see them beating Kentucky at home. And I could also see them losing at Georgia and losing at Vanderbilt. So that, to me, is the issue.
Now,
right?
Georgia, I don't see that one anymore.
Listen, man, at this point, I don't know. Like, I think anything is in play. And the only reason I say that is because my confidence level in this is going down. But I think Georgia's going to win another one somewhere. I don't think they're going to finish 1-17. It's looking rough. I understand.
We'll get to them later. But
that's still one to me. It's just, I don't know, man. I look at this Florida team, and again, I just look at a team that when Colin Castleton and Tyree Appleby are at their best, they're very good. But if they're not, like, it's just even if they don't get enough help sometimes, and it kind of puts
devil's
them in a
advocate, they didn't get much out of Myron Jones, who's been pretty good, and they still won the game.
True.
You're not buying this under any circumstance, are you?
I'm just telling you, I see a team that's 17-10 and 7-7 in the league, and to me, that's a pretty average team, right? And I think you played an Auburn team that struggled on the road. I'm not knocking Florida here. I think though we have to point out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go beyond just one game. I need to look at the whole body of work here, and the whole body of work still tells me that I know they had a 4-game winning streak not long ago, but those were all teams that aren't going to be in the tournament. And the Kentucky game, the A&M one, if they had won that game, my opinion on Florida
they're in
would
the
be
tournament
right
now if they win that game.
Yes, and it's just like, but those are the frustrating ones that still, even when they win a game like this against Auburn, those are the frustrating ones you look at and go, if only, right? Like if you just win that game, it's just so much different. And so yes, I want to make that clear, and I already know what to expect here in terms of Florida fans probably not gonna be happy with me, but I am giving Florida all the credit for beating Auburn here. But I also look at this and am I back on? Should I just jump back on the bandwagon and just completely trust this team yet? I'm not there, and maybe some other people are going to after this one game. I'm not there yet, because I still think that they certainly have work to do, and I think it's going to be a very interesting final 4 games here. And maybe Florida proves me wrong. Maybe they go 4-0 here the rest of the way. If they do, I'm going to be, selection committee calls me. I'm going to be pumping up Florida like no one else.
Are they calling you this year?
Well, it depends. We'll see. We'll talk about that in another video. But I just think that this is still one of those where I want to see this consistently. I don't want to just see this in a one-game setting because I want to see this consistency. But this is the biggest win for Florida thus far this season, and I think it's now just a matter of can they carry this over? Because that to me is the most important part of this. They have the tools, they have the potential. We said it going into the season. But I think we're still at the same place we've been in with Florida. At least I am. The conversation for me has not changed. It's still, we know Florida can do this. Can they do it consistently? That's what I want to see.
Our Seinfeld name for them was so perfect.
I don't even remember who we picked for them.
I can't remember. Her name was, she had a name, but it was Two-Face was her nickname.
Right. Okay.
I think we led with that one because to me that was the most obvious one.
Yeah.
And here we are 3 weeks later having the same conversation.
I once again, quickly, they finally, to me, proved they could beat a top-tier team. And I guess the Ohio State one still looks good. But, like, this was that one where at least you start thinking a little bit more about this team and say, if they play like that, they can get in the tournament. I don't know what their, ceiling is in the tournament, but they can get in the tournament if they play like that. And that's why you want to see that. You want to see that bounce back now against Arkansas. If they win against Arkansas, then I think my conversation that we have on Wednesday will probably be a little bit different. So
Auburn gets another great game out of Jabari Smith, who didn't miss the last 2 games from 3 almost. I mean, he's 4 of 5. The problem for Auburn is it's outside of him. It's 1 of 9 from 3. You talked about Auburn struggling on the road. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Auburn's got, and I know part of what you mean is that there were some close ones they could have lost, but Auburn's still 7-2 on the road, which is 2 road wins better than anybody else in the league.
Sure, but I think it's also you have to look at how they've played too, and that's why I agree. And I think that's how you could point out this game. They've been right there in every game they played in on the road. Like, don't take that the wrong way. Like, they have been there in every single game they played in. But I think at some point, and we've seen this in the last 2, some point that's going to catch up to you. And I think it's really going to catch up to you when you play better teams, when you're not playing the Missouris and the Georgias that, again, you look at those games, and I think we all have a different thought on how that game's going to play out with a minute to go. And, that's what I mean. They're going to catch up with you sometimes. But, yes, I suppose you can hang your hat on, well, they only lost by 1 against Florida. They lost by 4 in overtime in a game that, you thought they were maybe about to get blown out at one point. But still, I think that's what I mean. They catch up with you sometimes on the road, and I just think they've they've been a little up and down on the road recently, and that's why, yes, and I know they beat, go back to beating South Carolina, Alabama, Ole Miss, those games, but I'd say over the past month or so, your confidence in them on the road has flipped a little bit, and it really started with that Missouri game. And I don't think they played great in any of those 4 road games, counting the Missouri one on, and that's why it's one thing to do it against Missouri and Georgia, another thing to do it against Arkansas and Florida, but you lose those 2 games now, and I still don't have a lot of concerns with Florida, and I know people, and I know it's mostly opposing fan bases, but NCAA tournament's not played on the road. I mean, it's not played in true road environments. So I don't think it's time to be that concerned about Auburn just yet. Because again, they've lost by 1 at a borderline NCAA tournament team. They've lost by 4 in overtime against a potential, top 4 or 5 seed in the tournament. So I'm just not, you're just going to have some of these games. I never thought Auburn was going to go, 20, 30-1 or something. I never had that expectation. So they were going to lose some of these somewhere. And as we said before, they're probably the underdog at Tennessee. I mean, maybe not point wise, but I think a lot of people probably pick Tennessee in a game like that here coming up on Saturday. So those are the ones that my opinion on Auburn hasn't changed all that much. I think it's just, we've kind of set the opinion on where they've been over the past 4 road games. And that is something you think about, but we'll see if that plays out over the long term, but that's at least what we've seen in the last 4 from them.
Well, and they're still in the driver's seat for the overall title with Tennessee losing.
I was going to say, it would have been a lot more interesting. Well, I think things have still gotten interesting, though, because Arkansas is a team that I think the title race is going to be a lot more interesting than maybe we thought it was going to be.
Did Auburn losing let Arkansas into this thing now?
Well, I mean, there's 4 games left. Auburn's 12-2, Kentucky's 11-3, Tennessee and Arkansas are both 10-4, and Arkansas has the edge over Tennessee at this point, right? Because of the win.
I mean, we talked about this Friday,
again.
and we basically decided Arkansas was a non-factor, but we didn't account for Auburn potentially losing to Florida.
Yeah.
So
that was our expectation when we did that. Was we thought Auburn would beat Florida, but now Auburn losing to Florida opens up a lot more possibilities because, again, Auburn still has to play at Tennessee. That's going to, if you assume Tennessee wins that game, which we'll talk about it, but let's just say that happens. That takes Auburn to 3, and then you're looking at Kentucky, right? And you're wondering, okay, does Kentucky win out? But then I think Auburn still has to go to Mississippi State too, and that's kind of the one we talked about, maybe tricky. And if they lose that one, then I think here's the deal. The path for Arkansas is Arkansas has to win out, but they have to do it against Florida, Kentucky, LSU, and Tennessee, I think. So maybe they can go 3-1. And actually, no, they can't go 3-1, can they? They have to win out, basically.
Yeah, because they've got 4 losses and Auburn's got 2. Now,
So
if it's Auburn, Kentucky, then Auburn wins the tiebreaker via head-to-head. And if Tennessee were to get Auburn, then they'd have the tiebreaker, but Auburn would still have to lose another one somewhere, which Mississippi State would be your most likely, I would think, because State plays pretty well at home.
Technically, Arkansas, I think, can still win it, but it will take a lot of different scenarios playing out. Because if Arkansas wins out, that would give Kentucky a loss, that would give Tennessee a loss, and then basically it would be on Auburn at that point. So,
speaking of Arkansas, Eric Musselman described that game with Tennessee as a boxing match, and I was listening to it on the radio. I was driving, and it just, points were at a premium in that one. I mean, the defense was hard. I think everybody's guards got in foul trouble, and who's left standing at the end? Jaylin Williams, who goes double-double for the umpteenth straight time.
Yeah, this was like that's a good way to put it. I was trying to think of how to word this, but that's a good point. Like, it kind of was that sort of game where, I mean, it was a physical game. Neither team, and I think we talked about this going in. Like, it was the defenses I thought were going to pretty much define a game like this, because we still had our questions about Tennessee. They played much better offensively, but I think going on the road against an Arkansas team that's pretty good, we said it was probably, you didn't really expect Tennessee to come out and probably score 80 or something in a game like this. I just thought that was going to be a test and a challenge. And I mean, this was just one of those games that Arkansas was the team that made the plays down the stretch. And I think I jumped on the Jaylin Williams, started pushing that one at the right time because
Yeah.
ever since I said and we started talking about our player rankings and stuff.
Blake, he hasn't had a bad game in forever.
No, I was gonna say he's great, and that's once again I think I've kind of labeled him as the X factor, even though we know Note and Amude and all these guys are extremely important to their success, but I still keep coming back to Jaylin Williams. I mean, he doesn't come off the floor in this game.
No.
I mean, that is just, think about that. For a 6'10",
19
240-pound
seconds he was off
yeah,
the floor.
like basically, like it's just, I mean, this guy is on the floor pretty much the entire game, and he is just fantastic, and I still think he is the X factor every single time they play. Because even if let's say you have a game from JD Note where, once again, I mean, he fouls out here, only plays 24 minutes, but still, he gives you 13 points. I don't want to say they can replace what JD Note can do, but let's be honest, they have a lot of guards, wings, right? Like guys that can play on the perimeter. But they don't have another Jaylin Williams. They don't have anyone that can replace what he can do, in my opinion. So I think that's the difference, is where guards, I think you can replace a little bit more. And I'm not saying you can mirror the production of a JD Note, but they have no one that can mirror what Jaylin Williams can do. And I think that's going to be the big key for them moving forward. He has been so good. And as long as he keeps playing like this, Arkansas is going to have a shot to play well into March. And I just think that he was the difference here on the Tennessee side of things. I mean, it was a tough matchup. I mean, it was a tough matchup going into it, and we talked about that. And I don't know that there was a ton for me that I look at from Tennessee's standpoint. I mean, they turned it over 15 times. I think the big part of this was Arkansas only turning it over 10 times. And we said going in about Tennessee forcing turnovers, which Arkansas does too. But I think that was big for Arkansas not to have a lot of those mistakes. They're just going to really hurt you in a game like this. And hey, I mean, Arkansas managed to win a game that I think was much more suited to Tennessee's type of style. And credit to Arkansas, they made the plays, and yeah, Jaylin Williams was just he was great.
I'm going to push back a little bit. I don't think Jaylin Williams is their X factor. I think he's their constant. I'll tell you who I think their X factor is. I'll see if you can guess. Because X factor to me is like that's the variable that could go a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have I guess we have different definitions of X factor, but I understand. I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, X factor for them is Stanley Amude. Let me give you his point totals going backwards. 5 against Tennessee, 23 against Missouri, 19 against Alabama, 9 against Auburn, 5 against Mississippi State, 31 against Georgia, 12 against West Virginia, none against Ole Miss, 15 against A&M, 12 against Carolina, 8 against LSU, 5 against Missouri, 10 against A&M, 28 against Vandy, 19 against Mississippi State, and then before that, 2 against Elon.
I mean, they still won a lot of those games.
They did, but my point is, he's the guy like, and I think this is where this is important in tournament time, right? Like, if he blows up and has a big game, you know what you're going to get out of Williams. You know what you're going to get out of Note. Now, if he jumps up and gives you 20, they're going to be hard for anybody to beat.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I think, too, like his importance, too, in comparison to, like, Note, we've talked about, like, getting in foul trouble, right? And I think those are things that, you can't really – I don't know how you quantify that, but it's like, what was it? I think he was with Note, right, on the bench against Alabama. Like, they're the ones that basically set out the whole first half or a good portion of it. And so, yeah, I mean, he's that guy, too, that's, like, right there in terms of what he can bring to the table. And so there's no doubt. I mean, that's probably a better usage of the X factor term. But I guess I was just putting in based on the fact that I just think Williams is one of those players that's like, man, I think I think I said it the way I wanted to say it in terms of there's just no one that can replace him, period. And I think that's one of those things to me where and I think he's stayed out of foul trouble for a guy like that. I think he's done a pretty good job of staying out of foul trouble from what I can remember. And I'm pulling up his game log here real quick. I mean, he's only fouled out once this season. He's really only had a couple times.
4 fouls per 40 minutes, which is Okay, no, that's drawn. That's on the
I was
other
going
end.
to say
3.2 per 40. So he spread them out. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's huge because look at the minutes he's played this year, and he's done a really good job of not really getting into huge foul trouble a lot of the time. So I think that's so important as well. And I think it's just the style of player that he is. I think he puts himself. I think he has. I'm trying to think of the best way to put. Like he has that awareness. I think of
Yeah.
understanding where to be and where not to be, and I think that's important sometimes. So, yeah, I just it's been so fun to watch him continue to play like this. And yeah, there's a lot of reasons for Arkansas' success, but I think he's right there, at the top. So
Yeah, awareness is a good word because he's drawn 2 or 3 or 4 fouls most games, but he's only fouled out once, and that was Mississippi State, which they won anyway. But Nets this morning, Arkansas is 23, Tennessee 11. Those teams, it seems, it doesn't matter what they do; they don't move by more than 1 or 2. And that's where they are this morning. Tennessee 4-5 on the road, 5-7 quad 1. Arkansas 4-3 on the road, 3-4 quad 1. So that was again, Arkansas is getting in the tournament, but Hogs needed to get some big wins to pad that seed line a little bit, and that was one. Was that our rock fight of the year maybe so far?
I think we had another one that was worse than that. I don't remember what it was, but I'll find it. Don't
Top
worry.
5.
Yeah.
Anytime it's described as a boxing match and the winning team scores 58, I think that gets you on the list.
58's kind of high. 58's kind of high for me.
Oh,
I like
okay.
those 52-50 games, right?
Right.
Those are
okay.
but I hate to say
But you don't get many of those anymore.
Most of our rock fights involve Tennessee.
That's true.
Like, that's what I think can be frustrating for Tennessee fans is that can be the case sometimes.
They call it Rocky Top for a reason.
What is it? I mean, they had the 52-51 game against Texas. Go back to last year. They had that 50-48 game against Ole Miss. Yeah, they play the rock fights. So
weird game of the year. I think this is a top 5er. Kentucky and Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
Because Kentucky has no point guards. I'm watching that game on my laptop. The feed freezes. Alabama's up 10 or 11. It literally comes back 2 minutes later, and Kentucky's up. And I'm like, what in the world happened? That was right before halftime.
Kellen Grady happened.
Yeah, well, and Alabama never got it back.
Look, we talked a lot about this game going in. The whole conversation was surrounded around Ty Washington. We didn't know if he was going to play. And I said I still think I'd pick Kentucky. But when I found out Severe Wheeler wasn't playing, I'm thinking, I don't see. I really have a hard time picking Kentucky here. Not only does Kentucky win, they scored 90 points without those two guys. But the more I think about it, I'm like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? It's exactly what we've been talking about all year long, and really what we've been talking about over the past month and a half. The reason why Kentucky is so good is they have so many options, and they have different guys that could score 20 on any given night. They have probably, 6, 7 guys that could do that. And here we are. It's just we're right back to that. And give those 5 guys credit, because think about this. Those 5 guys basically played the entire game. I mean, really. When we talk about depth,
you don't see many games with fewer bench minutes. You've got the rest of the players. I think they had 9 minutes off the bench.
Minutes.
That was it.
9 minutes off the bench. And
they have good players like Lance Ware, Damian Collins are good players.
Think about this. Collins played 4 minutes and had 6 points and 2 offensive rebounds, 4 or 4 from the free throw line. So that's for 4 minutes. That's a pretty good stat line.
He does that a lot,
that, right? I mean, it's like 4 minutes you get 6 points out of this guy. And
he's the mini microwave. He comes off the bench. He gives you 10 minutes and 12 points if you need it.
It's incredible. But yes, for them to throw their starting 5 out there and say, "Here you go win this game," and that's the only choice we have. They did, man. And Kellen Grady was the difference. 7 of 9 from 3. I really thought Alabama. I mean, they were up 13 the first half. I thought the scenario was about to come into play where Alabama just keeps making shots, and they win this thing by 15 or so. But it just completely flipped. I mean, think about this. Alabama's up 13 with 5.5 left in the first half. Kentucky's up 16 with 10 minutes left in the second half. So that's a huge swing in terms of how quickly Kentucky was able to kind of take things in the other direction. they are. I mean, that to me, that's like one that Alabama, you look back on and say that's a missed opportunity for us because you couldn't have asked. Well, I mean, certainly if no one plays, but to have your top guards like that, point guards, both out, but yet here's what I think was really important. Davion Mintz, I know they scored 7 points.
This is where I bet you're going to cite the number that, yep, I was going to get to that next.
0 turnovers.
Crazy. Their third point guard.
Well, and look, I mean, let's point this out as well. What did we say? We go back to last year, right? What was one of the biggest reasons Alabama had success last year? They could turn defense into offense, right? They could turn people over. They are not turning people over enough this year, and I think that is something where you're seeing that in the defensive category. I mean, where they give up 90 to a team that didn't have its top 2 point guards. And it's because they're just not forcing enough turnovers. Go back to like the Auburn game, right? We've talked about Auburn. Auburn can be a little interesting sometimes with their selections of ball handling and that kind of stuff. But go back to the Auburn game. Alabama gives up 100. Auburn only turns it over 8 times. So I think that is something too for Alabama that the pressure is on because they're not necessarily forcing enough turnovers at times. And yes, there have been games where they have, but these are the kind of ones, especially with a team without its top 2 ball handlers, you would think that you find a way to have more forced turnovers than that. But now the starting point guard on the other team doesn't even turn over once. And we talk about X factors. Like I think Davion Mintz is in that X factor category because we talked about him a lot, and he doesn't have to score 15 a night. He just has to be kind of that older, experienced guy that can sort of take some of the pressure off at times if they need someone like that. And they needed it in this game. And for him to play 38 minutes, not have a single turnover in a game like this that was I mean, this thing was just up and down. I mean, it's chaos. Yeah. And for him not to have a single turnover, credit to him, man, because credit the entire starting 5 there, because that was just a warrior type performance from them. And man, that was the sight. So
speaking of like, you look away from it and it's all changed. I was under the impression for about an hour or two after LSU Carolina was over that LSU had won that game, because I was watching the scoreboard and I was doing other things. And this is one we got the call in it being wrong, but the spirit of what we had was right. We thought that LSU would cause Carolina trouble because Carolina's turnover prone. They turned it over 20 times. What we didn't count on was 33 points from Jermaine Cousinard. And you've seen this team as it's gotten better. Like either he or Bryant or sometimes both of them have had a lot more big games lately, and they're starting to win more.
Cousinard's season high before that game was 17 points. He goes for 33 in this game against the best defensive team in the SEC. Once again, there is the SEC. For all of you out there who get on us sometimes about, well, how did you not pick this right or that right? Here you go. Like
we had the script.
It's like this
and
is
just yeah.
Well, it's funny. I remember back because we were talking about the confidence rankings, right, on the picks, and you look the first time you said to me, you're like, well, you put LSU at the top, and I'm like, no. I don't trust them in this spot here. Like this is one that we did pick LSU, but I looked at this game and thought, man, this is going to be close. And it goes back to what we said, because I think LSU still is an offensive team. They're going to make some of those turnovers. Times they should not make those turnovers. And yet South Carolina, if they get going, if they can find any offense whatsoever, their defense has been good enough at times to make enough plays to put them in a position to win. And this was by no means a pretty game, I think, because of all the turnovers on both sides. You know, when 2 teams combine for 35, that can happen. But I mean, give South Carolina credit, give Cousinard credit. They made the plays, right? And I think we said, like, Keyshawn Bryant, Cousinard, it's just so up and down. Bryant only scores 3, but it didn't matter in this one. It's like Cousinard has 33 after he had 8 in the previous game. I mean, it's just, you don't really know what you're going to get, but yet the potential is still there with South Carolina. And what do you know? We look up now, and here they are with 4 games left. They're 7-7 in the league. Right. And it's just like, but we had said they had feasted on the teams that were near the bottom, except for Vanderbilt, who's moved up a bit. And we'll talk about them in a second. But, they had beaten Georgia twice. They had beaten A&M, Ole Miss. Can they beat a good team? And they did. I mean, they beat LSU, and I don't think it's time to start having any conversations about South Carolina being in the NCAA tournament. But hey, if they went out, then we can start having those conversations because they still got Mississippi State, Alabama, and Auburn. But if they went at Alabama and at Auburn, this is going to be the Frank Martin special here.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be. We were just waiting and waiting for everyone to count us out, and all of a sudden here we are. I don't think that's going to happen, for full disclosure, but it's a good win for South Carolina. I think it's a disappointing loss for LSU because this was, to me, a really good opportunity. But I don't know. Maybe they had the look ahead game on their mind because they go to Kentucky on Wednesday. But yeah, this was a missed opportunity for the Tigers.
I think. Let's see. Well, I guess Carolina hasn't yet clinched a first-round bye in the tournament because they're 7-7 and A&M's 5-9, but they're getting close.
Yeah, because A&M
they're tied for fifth. There's a three-way tie. Excuse me. I'm sorry. There's a five-way tie for fifth at 7-7.
Yeah, that's
right in there.
Anyone doing any SEC tournament projections right now, I would hold off. I think I'd wait until the final game day. I don't think that's a good idea. What we do know is that the top four are pretty much set in stone at this point, I think.
Yeah.
Unless barring just a complete collapse from Tennessee or Arkansas, which I don't see happening.
Hit your free throws, LSU. 13-22.
Yeah, that was bad.
Afton Reed 0-4. That's the main culprit. There's your difference.
We've said it. They're not a great offensive team, and I just think that they can be very frustrating to watch on offense sometimes, and they just don't have it's unlike last year, where they had 4 or 5 guys that you could count on at any time to hit the 15-point mark. This year, I think you're just hoping that Tari Eason and Darius Days hit the 20-point mark. If they do, you just got to find someone else that can do it, and they just haven't had that enough consistently. So,
well, I think we called it on Vandy. That was a back-and-forth game late. Neither team could get out to a big lead for long, and Vanderbilt just made the plays down the stretch. Scottie Pippen Jr. gets 24. The big thing, though, Liam Robbins. And I'll be honest, Blake, when I saw him play against Kentucky a few weeks ago and saw how out of shape he was, and I knew about the foot problem, just like there's no way. He has turned it on. He's given them 24, 25 minutes a night, which is what we thought we'd probably be giving them if he's healthy. He draws 7 fouls. He blocks 2 shots. I mean, he just does a little bit of everything. It's 4 or 5 from the field. They still don't have Chapman, but it seems like as valuable as Chapman's been, Robbins is probably the better piece, which is what we would have said going into the season.
No, he was the difference in this one. There's no doubt. I mean, he just made some big plays at the big moments, and that's what you need out of a guy like that. And as we always say, I mean, you can't teach 7 foot, and when you have a guy like this, he can just affect the game in so many different ways. And I think that's something else too this year, right? We came in the season. We always talk about the guards because the style of play.
The big men in this league are as good as I remember in a long, long, long time.
This is one of the better years I can remember too, in terms of just overall quality of the big men. Because normally our focus has been on, the influx of the Nate Oateses and the Musselmans and the Pearls, the guys who really, guard oriented, push the tempo, those kind of things. But as we're seeing, like even at Auburn, I mean, you've got 2 big guys that are excelling in what they do, in Bruce Pearl's system. And then you look around at all these other guys. I mean, it has been quite a year for some of the big men. And that's why I think if you're Vanderbilt, we can play the what if game with a lot of teams, but this is one of those big what ifs for me. It's like, we think about all the issues this program's faced in recent years. And my goodness, man, if they just have any sort of injury luck whatsoever.
All right, I'll give you a what if that doesn't have to stretch it, okay? Give them Robbins back when they lost to Temple. That was an overtime game. I think they win that one.
They beat South Carolina 1 of 2.
And they beat South Carolina. Yeah. And then at that point, they would be, 16-10? That takes away – because they've had – let's see. Here's the issue for Vandy. 5 losses outside of Quad 1, which that takes 2 of them away. And you're looking at outside of Auburn and Kentucky – and Tennessee, which don't have any losses outside of Quad 1. The rest of the NCAA bubble teams in the league have got 2 or 3. I'm guessing the net jumps up to, I don't know what, they're in the 60s maybe at that
Need to be
point.
rooting for A&M too at this point because A&M's on that borderline, aren't they? Where are they at now in the net?
They're 71.
Yeah, so does he get
But
because that?
it's home win, so it doesn't really.
Yeah, that's
It's a
true. That's
quad
right.
two.
That was a home
So,
win. Yeah, that's right.
but point
Well,
is, I don't know that they're in. But let's give them 16-10 at this point, and then let's say they get Alabama at home, lose at State, they get Florida at home and beat Ole Miss. That's a tournament resume, I think, don't you?
that's what we talked about going in.
And that's a lot of ifs, but
yes, but if we said going into the Texas A&M game, if they finish 4-1, I think they've got a legitimate chance to get in. Now that is barring playing a team like South Carolina or something in the first round of the SEC tournament, losing that game, right?
yeah.
Because then that is where you get into a situation where it gets a little tricky.
Yeah. That's a take care business scenario. Don't lose to a non-tournament team, and then you're probably in.
Here's what I think your best recipe for success is Vanderbilt. Go 4-1. Don't lose to a non-tournament team. I know this is a big what if, but let's just play this out for a second. In that scenario, you've got all these teams jumbled at 7-7. If they go 4-1, they're going to automatically move up probably into, I don't know, 6, 7 at worst probably in the league. So in that scenario, think about this. I think you want to find a way to play LSU, Alabama, or Florida in that first round of the SEC tournament. If you do that, and let's say you lose, that doesn't hurt you the way that playing a South Carolina or probably a Mississippi State, because I still don't think they're getting in. So it's all dependent on winning games. But at the same time, for anyone who thought at one point this was just a wild scenario, it's no longer that crazy of a scenario, because I think that they still have a chance. But to me, I mean, as of right now, if you ask me, and I don't know which one I'm going to pick, I think they beat either Alabama or Florida at home. I don't know which one it's going to be, but I think they beat one of them. But then it's like the pressure is on because you've got to win both of those road games. And I just don't – at Ole Miss and at Mississippi State.
But do
Vanderbilt
they?
is not – I don't think
okay,
they win at
if you
State.
give them 3-1, they're 9-9.
I don't think they win at Mississippi State. I just don't like the matchup.
No, I don't either. Although I do have questions of how interested is State at that point.
I would say we'll see about that on Saturday.
But,
yeah.
I mean, hypothetically, 3-1 puts them 9-9 in the league.
But if they go 3-1, they have to beat Florida and Alabama at home, right? And I think that's the bigger issue. I think they
probably
win one.
is. I'm just trying to think of the what ifs. Like if they get to that point, there may be a first 8 out kind of team.
Yeah. I think no matter what they have to, well, I don't want to say no matter what, because I think the scenario I just brought up of playing a tournament team in the first round of the SEC tournament, losing in that scenario of finishing 4-1, I think they would get in at that point. But
okay, let me give you what if they run the table, which I don't think they're going to do. But they run the table, they're 10-8. All of a sudden they've got
run the table.
4 or 5 really nice wins. Is that a just don't lose to Missouri in the tournament type of thing?
Yeah, probably. I think that's what it would come down to for me. But I would point out what Rocco said too. Remember, it's not always about what you do. It's about what other teams do. And I think you have to, at this point, you have to assume there are going to be maybe a handful is too many, but I think you have to assume there are going to be 3 or 4 teams that are going to steal bids. And that's where, for a team like Florida, that bubble starts to shrink. And, and that's where like Vanderbilt, who's trying to play way into that conversation, who's not there right now, that bubble gets smaller and smaller. And so it's really hard to project out until, based on that. But let me say this quickly, and I know we're going to get some hate mail about spending so much time on Vanderbilt here, but
well, we hadn't spent a lot of time on them all year, so they kind of do their
they
their
finally
run.
do some time. We haven't spent a lot of time on them the past several years. Let me say this too. They're the kind of team, I think, where they're going to finish in the SEC, even if they don't go, let's say 3-1. Even if let's say they go
2-2.
Let's say they're 2-2 in their final 4. They're going to finish where? Probably around.
Be 8
I think
and
they'll
10.
be in that 8-9, 10 range.
Here's what we need. We need Vandy and Florida in the first game of the tournament for both of them. Winner gets into the league. Winner gets into the big dance. Loser goes
That
home.
would be nice.
That's what we need.
We've had some of those games before.
Yeah.
But I think here's my point. If you're asking me right now, let's say Vanderbilt finishes 8-10. Here's who they're going to play in the first round. They're going to play either LSU, Alabama, Mississippi State, Florida, or South Carolina. Vanderbilt, to me, can beat all of those teams. And that, I think, is the biggest discussion point now. I think they're playing to a level that they can beat any of those teams. And maybe they don't beat Alabama. Maybe they don't beat Florida. But I think right now they are at least showing you a reason why you believe they may be able to, right? And I think it's not as cut and dry anymore to where they could beat one of those teams. I don't think they're beating, maybe the top 4. I know they've beaten Arkansas. I understand that, but that was a long time ago. But I think this is the first time we've had this conversation in a while. I mean, years.
You know what I'm thinking. What Vanderbilt needs at that point, if it's a borderline tournament, what it needs is Auburn and Kentucky avoidance, because it has beaten Arkansas on the road. It's beaten LSU at home. It's taken Tennessee to the wire once and almost to the wire again. I guess that game in Knoxville was close. Like the one in Nashville was a tie game with under a minute left. So I don't think they can beat Kentucky and Auburn, but the way they played, they can beat anybody else on a given night. To me, it may just be if they're close, it's how does the bracket fall? Because you don't want a game against a Georgia or a Missouri that does nothing for you and certainly kills you if you lose. And I don't see them beating either one of those teams, but anybody else. Hey, here's the perfect scenario. You go 3-1 or something like that. You get in, then you rack up a win against, say a Florida and another one against an LSU. You're in the tournament.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
that's a look. I don't think they're going to do it, for the record, but they've been so dreadful for so long. Yeah, it's interesting to have the conversation for once, because that fan base is feeling it a little bit right now.
Well, and that's what I want to say is I get that Jerry Stackhouse is taking criticism, but the fact that we're having this conversation right now tells me he's doing something right. And I don't know how it turns out. I have no idea. But this is as good of a Vanderbilt team as I've seen in several years. I know they haven't had a lot to go off of, but at least that shows me that they've gone in the right direction for us to be even having this conversation with 4 games left in the season. So,
all right, let's get to the last one. This was a rock fight in a non-basketball sense. You got the Tom Crean stuff overshadowing everything. You got an assistant coach who gets in an altercation with, was it the director of ops or whatever, or staff guy? I don't know. You got that. You get him caught on a hot mic saying something about his point guard. They're playing at home. Ole Miss has no Jarkel Joyner, no Matt Morrell, who are their best 2 remaining players. The next 2 guys after that, Brooks and Rodriguez, are the next 2 best players. Of course, their other best player, Ruffin, is hurt and he's done for the year. So, like, that is on a platter for you, Georgia, and you just wet the bed isn't even the word for it. I mean, they weren't even competitive.
Yeah, let's just call this what it is. I'm not. I don't want to feel like I'm not. People run with stuff sometimes, but I think you can start to see the dots forming in terms of Georgia's future in basketball. At this point, as we said, I am the optimistic one in saying that they're going to win another SEC game, right? Most people probably don't expect them to win another SEC game, and that means they would finish 1-17 in the league. They'd be among, if not the, I'm not sure like where they're at in terms of worst power conference teams. I'm sure they're up there. I guess I'd have to look at every league to think off the top of my head of who's worse power conference wise. But I mean, here's the deal. If you go 1-17 or even 2-16, it doesn't matter. In your 4th year on the job, I just think that's a hard thing to rebound from.
Well, and they're headed for their worst record in conference play ever, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, they went 2-16 this first year, and like you said, if they don't win, they're going to go 1-17, and that's going to be that. I just think it was going to be hard.
Alabama deprived us of another 0 for 18, which I didn't know we'd see again after Vanderbilt did.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would not have expected that either. But it's like, even without all the extra stuff, going 1-17 or 2-16, you're already facing an uphill battle. But now all of this other stuff added in, I just think we have to. Again, I'm not going to flat out say it, but I think everyone understands the direction the program's headed in. And I think at that point, that will open up a much bigger discussion, because I've told you before, I did the stat, I guess it was last year sometime. I think, and I don't, somebody's going to say that I'm wrong about this, and that's fine, because I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head. But I think since 2016 maybe, every team in the SEC has made the NCAA tournament except for Georgia. Could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's accurate.
I think that's right.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone's made the tournament, because that was the last year Vanderbilt made it, right? It was 2000, whenever the last time Vanderbilt made it, that's the starting point of this discussion. Georgia has not made the tournament since then. They're the only team in the SEC. And still, I think it's like half the league has made the Sweet 16 since that point as well. That was another stat that kind of blows your mind. So if you're Georgia and you're looking up at that, how can you possibly justify giving anyone any confidence that you're heading in the right direction, right? And I'm saying this as someone, I have nothing against Tom Crean. I've always said it, going back to the Indiana thing. I think you can pick apart his entire career, but I still don't think he got enough credit at Indiana for
won the Big Ten twice after Kelvin Sampson left that program in shambles.
Think about, he went 1-17 in year one there, right? And that was, but then to get where he got, I thought he did, but that's Indiana. That's a different beast, different pressure, and I understand it. But I just, this just isn't working. That's the only way I think you can put it is, even if you can, I know everyone has an opinion about Tom Crean, but this isn't working, and it's just based on facts. So we'll have a lot more discussion, I think, about Georgia in the coming weeks. The buyout, I think, is the big thing right now. If you look at it, I know it drops once they get to the tournament, after the tournament, SEC tournament, that is. So I think that's where you'll start to see some decisions play into what's next for Georgia. So, yeah, I know we spent this whole time talking about Georgia. Ole Miss, that's a nice win to win the way they did without all those guys, as you said, and they had a 4-game losing streak, so they just needed something. And remember, they had lost a couple of those games in overtime. I said that too. Ole Miss has actually not played that bad over the past several weeks. It's been kind of deceiving because they had the 4-game losing streak, but they're actually a team too that I think has gotten better. It's just, you're in the SEC, and it's just hard to find those wins. And I think it's going to be even harder because they're 2 of their last 4 on the road at Auburn and Kentucky. So you're thinking, man, no thanks on those two to kind of end the season. But Ole Miss played pretty well against Auburn the first time. I think it may be different this time, but yeah. So we'll see. Ole Miss, if there's one team in the SEC that's just been decimated this year by injuries, it's Ole Miss. They're one that just is, man, they have just not had any luck injury-wise. Yeah. I think Vanderbilt's just kind of transferred to Ole Miss because that's just been, I think this is kind of a lost season for Ole Miss. I don't think you really judge Kermit Davis on this season. He's just, look at all the different lineups he's had to play with. Look at all the guys that have missed games. So I can't say I feel strongly about Ole Miss in terms of one way or the other, just because I think it's been it has. You don't want to label any season as a lost season, but man, they've just had so many guys in and out. It's been hard to find any consistency, I think, with that.
I did Neil McCrady's Ole Miss podcast last week. Good friend of mine. If you're an Ole Miss fan, he's got an incredible Ole Miss podcast, best around. But he told me he'd heard a name that had popped up at Georgia. And I'll give you a hint. He's a coach that's been in this league not that long ago. You're like, thank you for this.
I think for
putting me on the spot live.
But no, I think I know who you're talking about. But I don't want to say it because if I get it wrong, I don't want to start any rumors. But I think I know who you're talking about because I brought this name up a week ago on a radio show I did in Memphis.
Andy Kennedy?
Yes.
Yep.
I brought that up to someone about a week ago, and I said, look, if you really think about it, Andy Kennedy, and I this is not a comparison between Andy Kennedy and Kermit Davis because I don't think that's a fair assessment when you think about how long Kennedy was there. But
Did a really solid job, really good job there.
I mean, that's the thing is like, and I'm saying this too, Kermit Davis, Jerry Stackhouse, this is not anything to do with them, but I know everyone as well has their feelings on Kevin Stallings, but I am still one that will go back and say, I understand maybe what you think about Kevin Stallings, but if you look deep into what was achieved, to me, Kevin Stallings and Andy Kennedy were two of those guys that were, I know you want more, but I also think you have to look at this and understand that to sustain the level that those two were able to sustain at times, was not easy.
Harder than anybody thought.
Very hard to do, and I will continue to hold that stance no matter what anyone tells me about Kevin Stallings or Andy Kennedy. I will always hold that stance. And again, this is not me saying anything about Davis or Stackhouse because I think it's a different discussion. But just in those years of kind of where they were and to be able to sustain that success, and yes, maybe it wasn't the Sweet 16 or the Final Fours, anything like that. It's just college basketball is a very random game when you get to the tournament sometimes. It's all about matchups. None of us could have ever predicted South Carolina to make a Final Four as a number, 7 seed? Never in a million years could we have predicted that. But sometimes the chips just fall in the right direction or the wrong direction. And for Vanderbilt, I keep thinking back to look at all those times they got to the tournament, and then they lose a game, terrible matchup, I thought, against Siena, right? Like, that's one I think back to, and I'm just thinking, that was a really good Vanderbilt team, but, man, that Siena team was just a team that was matchup was terrible for Vanderbilt. And when we talk about that's where you get to the tournament, right? Murray State, another one of those games where you're just kind of thinking back and you're thinking, man, that's another one that's kind of tricky.
Underseeded Murray State.
And then who was the other? Was it Richmond? Was that the other one?
Richmond was one, and then they got Wisconsin in the round of 32. Which that's a program. It's a program that now has not won an NCAA tournament game in over a decade.
Yeah. So I mean, think about that, right? And
or was it 12 or 11? Then they won last.
I don't remember. That feels like forever ago. But going back to our original discussion, I know I got us off, but that's where, like, look at what someone like Andy Kennedy, and this is what I said a week ago to the guys I was talking to. And he's right. If Mississippi State makes a coaching change, he's not going to wind up Mississippi State. Breaking news. He's not going to go there.
Yeah.
But I would tell you, if I was someone in the SEC and I made a coaching change, and it's not, one of those scenarios where he's not going to Mississippi State, he would be on my list somewhere. Because I think you have to remember, understanding the league is very important, right? And if you don't think that's important, I would say look at some of these guys who have come in with no sort of background in the league. I mean, whether you want to point out Tom Crean, whether you want to point out someone else, these are guys that have not been in the league before. And sometimes when you come in, it's so much different than maybe you expect. And look, I mean, we're not just saying this as SEC, like, we're not homers, we're unbiased. The SEC is the best league in the country this year. I think that and the Big 12, I think, are right there together. They're smashed together. And I'm fine if you want to have the argument one way or the other. If you think it's the Big 12, that's fine. But I think the SEC is way closer than anyone thought it would be. And so having someone that's known the league, Andy Kennedy's having success at UAB, he understands transfers. I think that's a big part of it too. When you make a coaching hire in this day and age, you better understand the transfer portal and how to get the right guys. Andy Kennedy understands that. So I can't wait till we're going to see some stuff out there. Report Andy Kennedy in line to be the next coach at Georgia.
You said it.
You said it. Please don't run with any of those stories. But no, and I know we're all speculation here, but he is someone that I think will be back in the SEC at some point. I don't know when that's going to be, but I would be more surprised than not if he is not an SEC head coach in the next 5 years.
Were we feeling the flow today?
Maybe. How long did we go? We went kind of long today. Hopefully everyone's okay with that. But it was a big weekend. That was, I think, the most interesting Saturday of the season thus far in SEC basketball. So
when are you going to finally acknowledge my Happy Gilmore literacy?
I've decided just to
just ignoring me at this point?
I decided just to no-sell all of them until you run through the entire group. Until you get the whole list, I'm no-selling every one of them. And then we're going to go back and pick them apart. Yeah, this is going to be like an Easter egg hunt. So we're going to go back and pin them all together in like a highlight video.
I dropped 4 the other day, and you didn't even blink in the same show.
Yep.
Okay.
Sorry. Sometimes I'm in my happy place. So Just that's it.
Oh boy,
My happy place.
Yeah, well, we all have to find our happy place.
Yep, that's right.
We need to find our happy place and get predictions up. So,
yep, we'll have those big Tuesday too, man. There's a lot of interesting. They only get bigger from here.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, we'll quit this to start that. Anyway, be sure to hit the subscribe button if you're watching. That helps us a bunch. We'll see you in a minute.